Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are really excited to be here with all of you tonight to celebrate one of our most anticipated novels of the season, Glassworks, by Olivia Wolfgang-Smith. Olivia Wolfgang-Smith's fiction has appeared in Salamander, Ninth Letter, The Common, and elsewhere. She holds an MFA in creative writing from Florida State University, and she originally hails from Rhode Island and lives in Brooklyn with her spouse. This book we are celebrating tonight, Glassworks, is her first novel. We love getting to launch debut books with folks, so thank you for letting us help celebrate you. We're joined in conversation by Christopher Gonzalez, who is the author of I'm Not Hungry, But I Could Eat. It is a 2021 NYFA, NYSCA Artist Fellow in Fiction. His writing appears in Astra Magazine, Poets and Writers Online, The Nation, Catapult, Best Microfictions, and Best Small Fictions, among other journals and anthologies. He currently serves as a fiction editor for Barrel House Magazine and lives in Brooklyn, New York. So welcome, Christopher. We're so glad you're here. I love your title of your book. And so glad to have everyone watching with us. I want to let folks know you can say where you're watching from in the chat, say hello. You can also ask questions at any time, and Christopher will incorporate them as we go on. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way so that we can get right into it. I'm so excited to hear more about Glassworks. So welcome to you both. Thanks for being here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Yar. Thank you to Charis. Thank you for having us. This is so exciting to be here. And thank you, Chris, for being in conversation with me. Hooray! Not even the real version of the book, the pre-version. I guess I'm going to start by reading a little bit from the book. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Glassworks, like ER said, is my debut novel, my first novel. This is a multi-generational novel that takes place over the course of a century. So from 1910 to 2015, mostly in Boston, a little bit in New York, and a very little bit in Chicago. So it's kind of tricky, the idea of choosing a passage to read, because no matter what, it'll be kind of representing one slice of a very long book that has a lot of different moods that it moves through. But I am going to dip tonight into the third section, which is set in 1986 in New York City. The protagonist of this section is Novak, who is a somewhat gender non-conforming queer person who works cleaning windows in Manhattan skyrises, in those rigs that come down over the roof of a skyscraper. She takes full-time care of her disabled father and intermittently of her best friend Felix, who is in an on-again, off-again relationship with an abusive boyfriend. Felix, all you need to know for this passage is that Felix loves Broadway, musical theater, and this is his go-to activity when he is in need of a pick-me-up. Novak hates Broadway but loves Felix, so this is how they have ended up at this matinee performance of a truly terrible show called Dames in Love. And I think the only other thing to know about this show is that in order to goose failing ticket sales, the lead has been stunt cast with a movie star named Kent Casper, who is very much like a Mark Hamill immediately post original Star Wars trilogy type. And that Felix has a big crush on this actor. So that makes this a particularly hot ticket for him. So this is a little bit from this chapter, kind of early in that section. It was the same as always. Red velvet seats built for children and Felix's, Novak's knees jackknifed up by her ears. Felix had bought orchestra, of course. They were sitting in a stagnant pool of Wednesday matinee money, octogenarians and sugar babies with their daddies, and advertising firms wooing clients. Novak wasn't sure how she and Felix fit in, a sugar baby who had stolen the credit card and taken his feral service dog to a show. Behind them rose a tsunami of decreasingly wealthy tourists and field trip groups, and the Broadway queens still healthy enough to go out. Novak would have preferred to be in the nosebleeds, beyond them even, so high she couldn't hear or see anything. Look at the ceiling, Felix breathed, reverent. Novak said. The lights dimmed. Felix sighed with pleasure and wiggled in his seat. Be nice, he whispered over the opening notes of the overture, as if they were hosting a dinner party for the show, and he was afraid she'd offend it. But Novak knew what he meant, and Felix deserved nice, so she faced the stage and resolved to pay attention. The show itself started the same as always, too. A crowd of people who looked like they dropped out of 5th grade in Indiana for this job marched on stage in faux randomized groups, greeted each other from a distance. They were playing to, and costumed for, the balcony. Drag, basically. Gummy false eyelashes and bright lipstick, loud blazers and drawn-on eyebrows. Novak got the familiar urge to lean away. Broadway wasn't meant to be seen from as close as Felix liked to get. Background action, inaudible chatter over a few brassy bars of introduction. Then they all snapped their heads to face the audience and started singing about a show they were about to put on. Oh, it was one of these. Props came out and were variously passed, stacked, tossed. General air of industry. They were putting on a show, these people, the stress, the pressure. Opening night was coming and there was still so much to do. Would they ever be ready? If you have to ask, Novak thought. A woman came on stage and balanced on a knife edge of silence. There was scattered applause. Felix participated archly. This was the lead, Novak gathered. Clara, the alternate Clara, importantly. Clara sang alone for a verse. Slowed down, spotlit. She looked a little distracted, Novak thought. But it would have been hard to match the ensemble's focus. These kids really wanted you to believe they were nervous about the show they were putting on. They were desperate to prove it. 2 of them off the stage left pretended to confer on something while Clara sang, and it was like they both had peanut brittle stuck between their molars. Then Felix's space movie husband came on stage, and everyone had to vamp for 8 extra bars while the audience lost its mind. They'd let him keep his movie star haircut, even though everyone else was dressed like it was the 1950s. He looked like a Butch Farrah Fawcett. Well, no, what he looked like was Commander Rex Reginald from Space Saga, which is what they were paying him for. Kent Casper was spotlit and flanked by the whole company, but once the audience shut up and he could unfreeze from looking ecstatically up and to the left, he introduced himself as Andy, just a humble member of the chorus line who never got to show what he could really do on stage, or choreograph his own routines, or even, gosh, talk to the starlet, practically holding a mop. Felix grabbed Novak's arm and squeezed. Is he good? Novak whispered. Is this good for you? Felix shushed her violently. She clutched him back, teasing, but his face screwed up as she grabbed his bruised arm. She hissed an apology for the pain, for reminding him of it, for letting him take them to a nonsense show when they should have been talking about how to leave Jack for good. But Felix just covered Novak's mouth with his hand and watched the stage, rapt. Even when she licked his palm, he just removed it and wiped it on her pant leg without looking. Novak watched him for a moment, thinking that to see that love light permanently, she'd bag this Casper kid in a burlap sack and deliver him to Felix's door. She'd halt production on Chapter 3 of the Space Saga forever. She'd fight every nerd in the world. Then, regretfully, she turned back to the stage and noticed someone. Being such an obvious dyke in New York for Novak meant noticing. For pleasure and for protection. It was predator-prey. Noticing heavy-lidded glances dropped like folded notes. Noticing the barest threatening tension in a forearm muscle. Noticing necklines, haircuts, lesions, hands. When people were being idiots and when they were being smart. Noticing when you were being noticed. Confused stares at the shape of your chest, your jaw. Menacing glances at the way you'd touched, been touched, wanted to be touched. Friends and foes. As a teenager, in the early days after her mother's disappearance, Novak couldn't stop noticing familiar clothes, postures, faces in the street. Could that be? When she'd gotten over that, made peace with the fact of her self-sufficiency, she'd poured her energy into noticing who wanted to be fucked. Odd now to remember that Novak had once daydreamed about sex rather than destruction. In her day, she'd been able to pick up women anywhere, not just in bars but on the subway, at the deli counter. Now she was done with all that, too, and she noticed only people to avoid and people to look out for. It wasn't femme and butch, you couldn't see it like that, but there were people worth protecting, and then there were people with the necessary toughness to take care of them. It was about recognizing family. It was in this way that Novak noticed someone in the ensemble. Dressed as a man, breeches and suspenders, old-timey undershirt not unlike Novak's Henley, flat cap like an Irish poet. Young, so young, something familiar. He, too, the character reiterated in an alto, was nervous about putting on the show. Then the opening number was over, and it was time for clapping. Novak's hands moved in mine. And that's it. that's a little slice of that section. Yeah. Again, there are like many doors into this book, so that's like one particular one. Like, I don't know, Chris, if you had other things you wanted to talk about, but
No, I mean, I love that you read that section, partly because I mean that was one of my favorite passages in the book when I read it, for many reasons, partly because of Broadway, partly because I think even though, like you said, it's one slice from the book, I think it does a great job of like pointing to other themes. There's sort of longing for connection that a lot of these characters have. There's this idea of family, and in this context, it's like recognizing like queer family out in the world. But this is a book about multiple generations of a family, and also sort of a book that challenges and complicates the meaning of family. So to sort of like take us a little step back, can you sort of explain to our lovely guests here what was the genesis of the novel for you? Now, like there's the art, there's the sort of glassworks themselves that I think inspired you, which I would love to hear you talk about, but also how did you join that or marry that with like this larger work about family?
yeah, that's a really good question. And yeah, like this is maybe already known to anyone who's read like the jacket copy on the book, but in terms of like the book's opening in 1910, it starts with a sort of fictionalized version of these glass models, botanical models, and marine invertebrate models that are in the real world at Harvard and in general around America and around the world. That's the biggest collection of them that were made by this father-son team of Czech glass artisans, the Blaschkas, Rudolf and Leopold. They're the epigraph and the frontispiece, and like very much a part of the book itself in its final form. But yeah, the seed of the book from the beginning was about being inspired by those artists and their work, and the way that like scientific and academic and art career can all be like wound up in a family relationship in that way. And it had got me like thinking about all of the ways that like the messiness that comes when work and family are intertwined. They like the fourth section of the book is very different, takes place close to modern day 2015, and the glass work in that section is about memorial keepsake ornaments, so like firing human cremains into these permanent glass memorials. And that is also a very real art and science that I like learned about like quite shortly after learning about the Blaschkas, and it really made a big impression on me that in both of these senses, one that feels very very tied to the turn of the 20th century, and one that feels very modern, like a very like would have been considered kind of like blasphemous to many other eras of history before our own. That they're both like tying this like art and use of glass up with some of the most like intense like human like familial like intense like grief and collaboration with immediate family members. So those were you're asking about like genesis of the novel. That was like the very first sense, like learning about those two things so close together, entwining them together.
I think like something that's interesting about the glass as well, like so the other two sections, the middle sections, you've introduced us to Novak, who is a window or skyscraper like window cleaner, acrobat, and then it's in section two, Edward he makes like stained glass window, or wants to like become adept at making stained glass window. And I was interested in how you tied the characters to their craft. I mean, in some ways, like Edward's, this is a man of faith and wants a relationship with God, and so it makes the most sense that he would want to devote himself to like making stained glass windows for cathedrals, right? I'm curious how you sort of crafted the characters of, especially Flip, who's in section 4, and Novak around their sort of work. I don't know if you thought like if of their work as almost an extension of them in some way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Chris is asking about like the character of Edward in the second section, which is set in 1938. That his kind of situation is that he's tried and failed to become a priest. He like applied to seminary and was not allowed in, and so yeah, now he is apprenticing at a cathedral stained glass studio. That's sort of like the closest thing to the priesthood that he could like find, that like he had like the nepotism connections to be allowed to do. So yeah, that's an interesting. This is definitely like a novel about work. Absolutely. That all of the characters are very defined by their jobs, and for some of them, like Novak in the section that I read from, being this like window cleaner, she is very like she loves her job. Like not in the way that I think many of us like would aspire to love our jobs. Like it's definitely like work. But like it like I don't know, to the terms of your question, it's like it feels right. Like it's an extension of her. It's like this is what she feels like she should be doing. And the character, some characters, you referred also to Flip in the modern section, who is definitely like going from one like dead end kind of gig to another. In the when we meet her, she is living with her ex-girlfriend for financial reasons and like starting work at this memorial keepsake ornament company, and it's like definitely doesn't have it like locked in yet, dialed in. And so yeah, I think that's, I don't know if this is like something I was working out and like trying to like this level, but yeah, like the question of like there are characters who are sure that they are doing day to day occupationally the right thing for them, and then there are other characters here who have not found it yet, and it's like impossible for them to know existential peace for that reason. No.
Well, it's interesting. There's also, and this is like me being very just like surface level, but like the idea of cremains and like being burnt out, um, feel like they go very hand in hand in a very like easy, cheap way for me. But like not like cheap in the way you did it, but like I was like, oh, that's like I'm gonna point that out because it'll make me sound smart. But it's like there in the text, but also like on the subject of you like working things out. Like it is very much a novel about work that you wrote during the pandemic. You were like we're working on and sold during the pandemic, and I am interested in the ways in which like the specific time period we were like living in, about like burnout and like work culture, and it's shifting, how that sort of, maybe if it did at all, cast a light on how you approach writing about work in these four very distinct time periods.
Yeah. Oh, that's such an interesting question. Because yeah, there's I think that the difference, the main thing that varies between sections is like the amount of like all of these characters are like very passionate about something. It's not always like a healthy passion. Sometimes it's like literally an addiction, and like passion would be a real like gloss on like how on like what these characters care about. It's like when a passion sort of becomes a coping mechanism, and then like that kind of like slides in. But so I think that there are like some characters who are lucky enough that what they're passionate about, what they're passionate about and what they're talented at and what pays their rent are like all the same thing. But that's such like a magic and it's like a very even when it can be achieved, is not very stable necessarily, I think, maybe within the world of this book. So yeah, I think that that's kind of like the brass ring maybe that everyone is shooting for. I don't know, the question of, so I drafted it before COVID, but edited completely during. So I do sometimes feel when I like go back through for whatever reason, like a reading like tonight, or and like I do feel like sometimes like I can identify like where like COVID was like edited in, or like my emotional state it like became edited into the initial manuscript. And like I don't know, we talked about a little bit about this, I think, like recently, that the last section takes place in 2015 for a lot of reasons, but among them, the fact that a lot happened in and after 2016, that it was like important to me for the characters to be reckoning with other things, not necessarily those things, and including though the fact that the characters in that section are very kind of like smug about like the idea that they're like coming in at the apex of human history and they understand everything that's happened, and have all the knowledge they need to continue like living, and like just the idea that they're like don't realize what's about to happen to them is intense. And so like I sort of, as this is really weird, but in the final editing stages, like during COVID lockdown, I would be like sometimes like working on Flip's section and thinking like, how is Flip going to deal with what's going to happen? Like, what is 5 years from this? So that's my mental fan fiction of my own book, I guess, that I was.
It's for like if you want to pick it up again, like and no, I think that's great. I mean, like I think especially her section. I mean, not to give too much away at all, but I do think like there was just something very visceral about Flip's section, just like how like confusing and disorienting and frustrating it is to sort of make a living and find a path forward. And perhaps like is I think the book opens with Agnes in 1910, who does come from like I mean, especially compared to Flip, like a wealthier like world, and you almost see over like 4 generations how this family loses its wealth and loses its status. And so I am interested thinking about the characters more, or talking about the characters more, and how you sort of, that you said that they could be standalone sections, but they are very much in conversation with one another. And just how do you achieve that balance of like, this is a through line narrative, but you could, I mean, reading it, you could almost pick them out individually and have blown them up into their own novels.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it reads that way. I'm glad that it reads that there are like bones to all 4 of the sections. Yeah, I think that what I tried to think about as I was writing in order to make sure that that was the case, was that each of these 4 protagonists, which if I haven't, so it's Agnes in 1910, who is like a philanthropist, blue stocking, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's Edward in 1938, who's sort of like a hapless ne'er-do-well. We heard from Novak in 1986, and then Flip is the sort of burnout gig economy kind of person in 2015. That they all 4 of them definitely like think of themselves as like the protagonist of the book. Like there's not, I think that the reader gets to see each of them as like in other sections, in the other 3 sections, as a sort of like a remembered ancestor or a side character or sort of like distant or misunderstood kind of background person. But like as long as like we have each of the 4 of them, when it's their like moment to shine, being like, yes, like this 370 page book is all about me, and like that kind of like, I don't know, self-absorption is like a more negative word than the word I want, because I don't necessarily like, but like that sense of each of them being like the protagonist of reality for themselves is hopefully something that can be both a tragic flaw, but also helpful to the reader and to the book itself, because we're like made to take each of them as seriously as they take themselves, at least temporarily, I hope.
You do. I mean, it's interesting. I think something you said earlier too about like passion and how passion is related to work, but also I think each of the characters becomes hyper focused on something outside of their work as like a distraction or a hopeful, like what they hope is like an avenue out. And they fumble a lot. And you allow them to fumble in ways that are sometimes incredibly catastrophic, and sometimes in ways that are just like, your everyday, that was a mistake. Thinking about just sort of like developing plot, and I guess I'm interested, the question I'm trying to ask is like that line between allowing or writing characters who there's movement and there's action, and they make mistakes that are sometimes incredibly like harmful to them without sort of leaning too much into like just torturing your characters. I think this is me just like more as a writer than like a reader.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I feel like I struggle more, at least in early drafts, I struggle more with the opposite. Like I struggle with like writing first drafts where like, especially because I'm character, as you can probably tell by the way I'm talking about this book and like by the book itself, anyone who has read it, like that I'm character first. I come up with characters first. I have like, it's like, these are my imaginary friends and I'm going to like line them all up. And then I want them all to have a very nice time. I like struggle with like having to go back after first drafts and be like, no, like something bad has to happen. Like these people have to have problems. Which is not, I mean, these people have a lot of problems in this book. Like I got there. Like it went,
You did,
but,
you got there.
But yeah, I think that the thing that to have people who make bad decisions and face the consequences of those bad decisions without you put it like torturing your characters, that like I think as long as to me what's important is that we understand everyone's motivations like for everything that they've done, and that was something that I mean I hope that that's the experience of reading the book. That was my experience of writing the book, that like even in these in situations, which again like not to spoil, but I am thinking of some, I think I know what you're thinking what you're thinking of, that like I can understand the character's thought process when they make these choices, no matter how flawed or like how obviously flawed to the reader or to other characters those choices were. And yeah, then it's like a things follow, right? That everything is like, as long as there's like a therefore and because rather than a and then I think that that's the, for me at least as a reader, when I like I'm reading books that are like a tough sit but that I don't feel like victimized by the author, that's what like the difference is for me, when I feel like I can follow the through line of the logic of the characters as well as the novel.
Real quick, I just want to say if anyone in the audience does have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We could do a Q&A at the end, or we can just incorporate them into our conversation as they come up. More so, like, take a step back and think about the shape of the book and like the history of the book, or sorry, like writing historical fiction. For you, like all the research you did about specific time periods, about the actual like glass work and glass making, when does like research take a pause and then the fiction writing begin? Is it more of a dance that you're sort of toggling between the two as you're like building it? How do you know that you have enough of a like foundation to begin the process of like writing fiction? And specifically, like how much did you have to learn about glass before you felt you could like actually start writing like about it?
That's a really good question. These are all really good questions. I feel like, yeah, I've had a number of people in the last couple of weeks as this book has started like making its way out into the world ask me if I have like done like lamp work glass blowing myself, and I am like so honored that anyone thinks that like if anyone has a hookup, like I would like love to try it, but I don't think that is something that I would be trusted with. I have watched people do it, and it seems incredible, and it seems frightening and dangerous. Yeah, I think that for me, the research, like partly with the glass, and like there are lots of different ways that people are working with glass in this book, with like making these like very like hyper realistic botanical models, all of the different steps that go into making cathedral stained glass windows, which is like there's like a lot of like sort of like engineering that happens there in addition to like the different like artistry. And yeah, like then like more the window cleaning and like the more modern glass blowing that's happening in the last section. That obviously did all take like its own type of research, but it's kind of like the same type of research I was doing for everything else about writing those historical sections of like, I don't know, I really appreciate the way that you phrased this question of like being very open-ended about like when like you like you said something about like when does research like pause, and I do think that that is like how I experience it, as that like there's like a research phase, and then I get like, for me it's about like feeling like I understand the material culture of each of these, like the material world of each of these time periods well enough to like write, starting with like just like a scene in it, and it's like things like understanding like what like walking down the street would have felt like, and like if a character is going to go like buy a packet of peanuts, like what is the packaging going to be made out of and how much is it going to cost, and like what is the money going to look like that kind of information. And then I sort of like write till I hit a wall. There's like a meme joke about writing historical fiction is like you have to like stop and Google like when were towels invented, and there like actually is a certain amount of that. Like,
Well, because I also sort of wanted to ask, like, and you know, now we're just thinking like more broadly about historical fiction. Do you find like you through revision you have to like question whether did this thing like exist? Like maybe not so much in the drafting, but like maybe you wrote something that you were like, oh yeah, that's great, and then you sort of read over it and you're like, oh shit, I have to cut that because it couldn't have happened in 1938.
yeah, and I mean, if you catch it, the good thing is that if you catch it early enough, you can just change something is happening. Like you can move things around if because it's all fake, you can move things around a little bit to suit your needs, which is useful. I did that a little bit with, this is probably not what you were thinking of when you ask about historical fiction, but since it's important that Flip smokes a lot of pot, but also that it is illegal, I had to move the timeline around a little bit to make sure that that was working out. But yeah, I think that this is the first example that's springing to mind of something like that happening was like I mentioned spreadsheets a lot in a middle stage draft of this during the 1930s section when spreadsheets like did not exist, and that was just me realizing that I have that my own job has poisoned my brain and vocabulary. But yeah, I think that staying open to revision in that way, I dread the experience you're describing of realizing that I've written something that's not possible and must be changed. So I try to do as much research as possible beforehand and during so that I don't end up in that situation. But at the same time, like the danger is, I think we've all read like over-researched historical fiction where there's this like a 4-page digression about like what the legs on the furniture look like, because you can tell somebody just like learned a lot about furniture and wanted it all to be in the book. And I'm like as vulnerable to that as anybody. All the stuff in Novak's section about skyscrapers, like there is definitely like an early draft of this book that has so much more information about skyscrapers than anybody needs to know in order to understand these characters' journeys, because I was just excited that I was reading a cool book about skyscrapers. So
You're just vibing.
Yeah, exactly. You got to like make sure you hit the sweet spot.
Well, so I wanted like to talk a little bit about the 4 time periods again. So 1910, very turn of the century, the 1930s, which is like sort of like, I think, well, I was at your book launch last night, so like I'm cheating a bit, but you know, it is very much like the golden age of like slapstick and like movie and comedy. You have the 80s, Broadway, and then we have like very contemporary 2015. Which era did you go in feeling the most confident about? And which one did you think you were the most confident to like write? And then you sort of realized as you got going that you needed to do a little more.
That's a really good question. I honestly think that the one that I was the most like overconfident about, misplaced confident, was the like modern day, the 2015, which is concerning probably. But like there's something about like everything we were just talking about of like having to be really mindful about the material world of these other sections, which like even the 1986 section I'm like, you know, basically conversant in, but like it is still, you know, you still have to like think about it and be like, oh yeah, if they use a credit card, it's the knuckle buster. If they like, it's like thinking through things that like you just don't, that are sort of like not top of mind anymore. But I think I sort of learned going into the 2015 section that writing the other 3 I had sort of been forced by my by not being a native of those time periods. I had been forced to be mindful and forced to like slow down and sort of like be more methodical about the scenes and the characters in their world. And like I kind of had to like remember not to like half-ass it on the 2015 section. The other thing is that it's like kind of remarkable how much like I still had to do like some historical research to write that 2015 section. It was just like dumber. It was like trying to figure out like, was there a palm tree emoji then, and if so, what did it look like? Like
Oh
that kind of
God.
like remembering that kind of thing. It was just like a little bit sillier. But yeah, like weirdly that section kind of was the most challenging. Just because I wasn't as used to being mindful about it. I feel like the 30 section might have come the easiest just because I consume a lot of fiction and film that was like made like written or made during that time. So I felt like the sort of like the patterns and the like visual culture were like I don't know, not that they were more familiar. Like I'm not crazy. Like I but like the like I was like they're like different enough from my day-to-day life that I notice them. Like when I see when I like listen to like I've listened like in order to there's a scene where Edward makes a phone call in the 1930 section, and like I was like prepared to write that scene because I had listened to radio dramas where people make phone calls in the 30s. And been like fascinated because you're like listening to an actor in the 30s pretend to be making a phone call, and like to that actor it's not that interesting. It's just what it would be like if he was really making a phone call. But to me, listening to it, I'm like, this is crazy what I'm doing right now. So I don't know, long answer, but yeah.
No, it's a great answer. And I mean, like, just this uh, another like abstract, but like in general for you, I mean, writing into, because I think like, you know, because we have the like more contemporary chapter at the end, uh, I sort of started thinking like, for you, what does writing fiction into, or like history, do for you that like maybe contemporary or you know, I feel like I'm asking you like, why do you, is your dominant hand, like this is like your vibe, but you know, what do you do, what do you feel you gain from it personally, and also what excites you about it like as a writer?
That's a really good question. And I feel like I also, for what it's worth, I like love to, as I guess I was sort of just alluding to, I also love to read like historical fiction and to like it. So it's not, it is something that I really love to write, and I find it like challenging, but in a, like a very, like a great way. But it's like also something that I love to like passively receive and like enjoy as a reader. Um, I think for me, it comes down to, it's not the only answer, but it's the one that's occurring to me as you're asking the question, that like it is both comforting and really trippy to me to think about, this is going to sound very dumb, how like people have always been people. Like the like that is like something that, like when we're talking about like the actual Glassworks that inspired a lot of this, like what is amazing to me about the Blashka's work from the turn of the century and like even older, if you like go to the Met and see like the like glass like dishes and things that are there from like 4,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, like the reason that stuff like I have to just like stand there and stare at it for an hour is like just like thinking about like the material world of these people that like made and used these things, and have these like full well-rounded lives that were like obviously very important to them, and that like it's like this might be, not in the case of the Blashkas who left a lot else, but like might be all that's kind of left. So I think that is part of why historical fiction is meaningful to me both as a writer and a reader. That it really like, it just like turns up to 11, like the experience of thinking about a fictional character's life, the to have it like be a little bit more removed from like my day-to-day reality.
Yeah, yeah, and I think something that was, just thinking about like humans have always been humans in each of the sections, sort of go back to the notion of like found family and sort of how different societal constraints can require people to seek out, you know, sort of community in ways that are maybe safer than others or less safe, or like I thought that was like very present throughout the 4 sections. It's just sort of like what people have to do when like the systems that like family, for example, like the one you're born into isn't necessarily, or the one you marry into isn't necessarily the one that like you can depend on in some ways.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's like a big something, yeah, I've been talking about a lot over the last couple of weeks is that like this is a family novel, a multi-generational novel, and that like yeah, that to have that kind of like expansive definition of what like especially in the second half of the book, the sense of family and like the family tree gets very like interdimensional and like difficult to map in like a 23andMe type way. Like it couldn't really be done. But yeah, I think that like throughout the whole book, including in the first half, there's that sense of like, yeah, these characters are kind of having to make some big sacrifices from their from the point of view of their family of origin or their like societal norms in order to like find a type of family or a type of relationship that feels more authentic to them. But yeah, and then the sense too that like chosen or found family not necessarily being like a safer harbor than like it like the idea that all that part of being family means the like a special ability to hurt each other potentially and that being an element that comes in here for those characters too.
Anyway, um, we have a question from the audience from Laura Smith. Do you have a favorite moment in the novel, a favorite scene or image, and if so, what is it?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question and a very difficult question. I think that my answer to that question varies hugely day to day. Something about having the different sections and having the different like this book is not autobiographical, I guess obviously, like but it's not autobiographical, but it does have like a sort of like emotional resonance to me. But in the sense, there's not like one character I identify with. I feel kind of like different characters on different days from this book. So I think the answer to that question like sort of depends day to day on where I'm at. I'm thinking a lot of Edward lately from the 1930 section, just because he's very easily overwhelmed. And the book launched this week. I'm having a very overwhelming week. So I've been thinking of him a lot and of his kind of like experiences. We talked a little bit about, and I was talking yesterday about like his experiences designing and helping to make these stained glass windows, and experience like trying to cut out the like lozenges of glass to fit into the cane, the lid of the windows. And those lately, like the idea, like have been sticking with me. Like it's been so long since I wrote these scenes, it sort of feels like someone else wrote them. So I'll have the experience of going back and reading it and be like, wow, like that's how I would say that. It's like, yeah,
You did.
so that's been sticking with me, and I've been noticing it. It's been like a kind of a helpful meditative thing as I've been like walking around the city, like seeing stained glass places, and kind of like it's been like sticking out to me. But that my answer to that question, I feel like changes often, especially with this particular project that has so many different sections. Yeah.
And we have another question from Charlie Beckerman.
Really?
Given that there are so many queer characters throughout the book, do you feel like you discovered anything about queerness, either in history or in the here and now, in the process of creating the book?
That's a really great question. I think that yeah, Chris, you were kind of talking a minute ago too about like the sense of family and of like I think that the unique way that family functions in this book and that queerness also functions in this book, it's like there's something that is like I think kind of poignant and uncanny, I guess partly in being like a queer person and a fan of historical fiction, and like part of that and how those things like fit together always is that like kind of that uncanny sense of like looking for ancestry that's very ephemeral and very like kind of like archival and has to be not imagined, but like sort of read between the lines in a lot of ways. That like obviously queer people have always existed, and it is that, but like that uncanny sense of, and this is not only about queerness, but there's like a big extra layer to it of like that we can all be 100% sure, obviously, that many generations of people lived full and unique lives in order for all of us to exist, and then also statistically that like many of those people were queer, like whether they had vocabulary and context to understand that or not, but like probably a lot of them did, more than like records might still show. And like I think that part of the process of writing this book was sort of like processing and then letting go of any sense of like desperation to know the details about that. Like, I don't know, in my own experience with my own family, it's kind of shocking to me how quickly, as I go back through the generations, I just know nothing about like my own ancestry. That how quickly things become like apocryphal or kind of mythological, or like not really remembering who did what or what happened. So yeah, just like kind of to sort of like have like a more peaceful confidence that all of this that all of these people like lived these lives, and not having like an official sanctioned record of it doesn't make it less real or less meaningful. And that I think that this was sort of like a therapeutic exercise for me in that way, if that makes sense.
I think that makes it makes a lot of sense, and I think especially like comparing the first two sections to the latter half of the book, and you sort of see that in sort of like Agnes and Edward's, like, you know, you have that moment, or at least I did as a reader, where it's like, is this person, as they're like in these like heterosexual like presenting relationships, like are they queer, and like, or like, I mean, they probably they are, but like they're navigating a society where it's like not like Novak and Flip in some ways, or even if they're not, it's sort of like beside the point, because there's like this queer sensibility to sort of being adrift in a society where you don't feel like you fit in to this like role, right? Like
Something about like to have to like to figure out how to show love in this way that's like a very rebellious according to like social, like your immediate social mores, but also like without, because of that, not having like a clear model to follow necessarily of how to do that feels that for me at least was resonant in that way. And then the only other thing is that like Agnes's like one model of like what she wants her ideal marriage to be like is this like ancestral lesbian relationship that she's like trying to find a husband who will be like
her lesbian husband.
Yeah, no, like very much so.
Very much so.
That's like what she's ideally looking for. That she has this. I meant to look this up after I couldn't remember it yesterday. I can't remember if it's her great grandmother or her great grandmother, who ran a dry goods store with this other woman in colonial Boston, and they were in love, and like that's Agnes's ideal. And it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's the only healthy romantic relationship in the book, but it's what everyone is kind of striving for. So yeah.
Yeah, there are like healthier platonic relationships in the book, but it's interesting that like then for Agnes and Edward, turns out like who sort of lack a template, and you jump ahead, it's like someone like Flip has been given a template because of history, and yet is just as, if not more so, lost in many ways, which I like that irony.
Yeah, it's not like as long as you know what you're looking for, everything's going to work out. Like there are other ways to mess up.
Do we have another question? Yes, from Beth Perseverk. Could you share insights into how you write such realistic dialogue? And did you have a particular process for tailoring the dialogue to each of the four eras? I love that question.
That's a great question. I definitely try. Yes, I think that tailoring the dialogue to each of the 4 eras I think that has mostly to do with trying to read as much as I can written in different, and like even better if it exists, to hear, obviously better to hear recorded sound of people speaking from each era. Obviously that's not always possible depending on where you're writing to. But yeah, like, I think that there's no substitute for kind of like trying to get a feel for how people spoke and do speak. This is like, I think a common like writing exercise, or at least a very memorable one to me, if not common, is like to have like to go out, that a writing teacher will have you like go out into public and like just like exactly transcribe it's kind of messed up like eavesdrop on people talking in public and try to like write down as like exactly as possible what they're saying. So I think that like to be able to try to do that, but not just like in your moment in space time, like to kind of like try to think about how that changes. I'm glad to hear from this question that people think my dialogue is realistic. Like that's nice to hear. I think that I try to use, and I'm accidentally modeling it right now, but the way that people like will stop a sentence, I found that people stop and restart like much more often in real life than they sometimes do in some fiction. And I have noticed, especially in going back and editing and seeing how many M dashes I use in dialogue, that my characters do that a lot. Which maybe has to do with the kind of people I write about, who are like sort of anxious and halting for the most part. But yeah, I think not being afraid to use punctuation and not being afraid to be honest about how often people, when we are speaking, stop ourselves halfway through and start over and kind of have this feeling of like, I didn't mean to say that, so I'm going to stop. And kind of trusting the reader to get what is being elided in the hard stop M dashes, or like as they trail off into ellipses. I think, yeah.
I have like 2 more questions, but if anyone, I think we have time for maybe like 1 or 2 more questions from the audience, so please put them in the chat. Sort of want to think about like artwork. You opened with that section about the Broadway show Dames in Love, which is a sort of ripoff of Kiss Me Kate. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's definitely it's most of its DNA comes from it, yeah.
I'm curious to you, I mean, specifically about like theater, musical theater, but also just like any artwork in general, sort of like what do you think makes a musical good? Which is like a big question, but then also there are like pieces of theater and pieces of art more broadly that can be like bad, but like are also really good and meaningful. And I think about just like the way that like flawed art can just be as sort of impactful as polished goods, art. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like if we are talking about musicals, there's like specific answers for this art form. Like,
you can focus on that, the musical.
Yeah. Not that I was about to say I know more about it than about like as though I actually do know anything about Broadway, except that I enjoy it a lot. I don't know, something we were kind of talking about a little bit yesterday is that like because it's so collaborative as an art form, like it's possible to have and this is the case in the show within this book, that it's like a very bad musical being very well performed, not by the leads who are not very good, but by the ensemble who are excellent. So I think that that is like something that can end up, I think, being compelling when you have like sort of like a group project and like certain elements of it are like really at the top and others are not. But I think that like you're asking what makes it like what makes a musical good, like depends totally on what you as an individual audience member are like going to get out of it. Because I think like this is the thing of like, are you like an Andrew Lloyd Webber person or a Sondheim person? And like, and neither is wrong, but like both can
I would argue
right by the same standards, right? Like I don't know. Like yeah, like there's like because if you're going for like some spectacle and catharsis, and for something like loud to happen that might make you cry if you like are needing an outlet to express emotion. Like that could be there could be a musical that does not have anything like deep or smart to say that gets that job done. Like that's you can have, if a chandelier falls from the ceiling, like maybe that's all you need. Maybe that's what you need. But yeah, I think that yeah, there are different. That's what I think is maybe compelling to me about musical theater, is that there are different different ways to answer that question, depending on different criteria. I guess about fiction writing too, but we're not talking about that.
We're not talking about that anymore. But no, I think it is interesting. I think you're right. The collaborative nature versus fiction writing, which is collaborative in sort of sources, collaborative in sort of environment and community in which you wrote it, but is very much a solitary thing. You sort of have to be the one who like owns all of it. But with like musical or like any theater, there's a vision, there are different components, and you can pick and choose sort of like what stood out. Versus like I feel like a lot of people are like less kind to writers in some ways. But and my last question for you, unless anyone else has one, what do you see as the genealogy of this novel? Like other books that either you were inspired by or like directly informed how you approached the structure, or even like individual sort of arcs, etc.
That's a really good question. I think there are like too many answers to it. I think I'll say that I love multi-generational novels in general. Like it's a genre, a subgenre I really, really enjoy. And so there are like a ton of, like basically anything that is like a family saga is probably, if I've read it, present here. But I think that Yagyasi's Homegoing is probably one that like I think that came out in like 2016. That sounds right. That is one that like when I read that book, it really like opened up my vision of like what a family novel could be, like how large in scope it could be. And I think that I don't think that I would have been able to like conceive of the idea to write this book without that. And like kind of similarly, although you like this book is not anything like Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, but I think that like I would not have been able to like think of the idea to write it and to braid these sections without having read it and having like the way that David Mitchell like hops between genres, which obviously this hops much less intensely between genres, but just like being able to have that sense of like the writing style varying between. But yeah, those are not the only two answers to that question, but they're the two that come to mind first.
And they're like the binary mother and father of and then the fuller family tree is more complex.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that's time. ER, if you want to come back, and everyone, if you haven't yet, buy Olivia's book.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. We're just like so excited about this book. It cannot be said enough. This is a debut. Debuts are just frankly not usually this good. So like, this is a huge feat. Congratulations, Olivia. We're so excited for you. Everybody should click this teal button at the bottom center of your screen to buy Glassworks from Charis. It really does help us when you buy your books from us. We would love for you to also request this from your local public library. Check it out. Just let them know you want them to carry it. If they're not already carrying it. All of that stuff does help too. So if you're not able to buy a book tonight, do not fret. That is another way that you can help the world and help Olivia with her sales. And yeah, thanks to everybody watching. We love great questions tonight, and thanks for being a engaged audience. So thanks to both of y'all. I hope that the rest of your book celebration time is really fun. That you're reading. Do you want to shout out where you're reading tomorrow night, just in case folks are local?
Yeah, just in case that tomorrow night I will be at the Harvard Bookstore in Cambridge and at 7, I believe. If you happen to be in the area and don't have tickets to Taylor Swift and want to commiserate, come on by.
we've already had the Taylor Swift onslaught in Atlanta, so now Boston can be immobilized by the Swifties. So, well, I hope that it is a wonderful time. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Christopher. And folks, I do want to just say that you can buy Christopher's book, I'm Not Hungry, But I Could Eat, from Charis as well. So I'm going to drop that in the chat real quick. So please check that very good book out as well. So, all right. Thanks so much. Good night, y'all. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.